Wolf Lake, Minnesota, just a few miles from Detroit Lakes, a town with a hardware store, meat raffles, and ice fishing. Population, 71. There used to be 3 more residents until the fire.
It's really a tragic situation.
Only one body was confirmed to have been found. The fire was actually reported April 3rd, 1976 at approximately 11 p.m.
50 years ago in the small northern Minnesota town of Wolf Lake, there was a fire at the farm home of Bernard, Peggy, and Brian Rusness. The Minneapolis Tribune in 1983 reported that Bernard and Peggy had both been married before, but were no longer with their previous spouses. They had lived in Fargo, in the Twin Cities, and in Rapid City, before they moved to their rural Wolf Lake home with their son Brian, their pride and joy. People who talked to the newspaper described the family as happy. Peggy's brother told the Tribune the couple had just remodeled the home. On April 3rd, Bernard was installing a sound system on his vehicle. He even left the hood up, keys in the ignition when he called it a day. But that night, a neighbor was driving when they saw the Rusness home was ablaze. Crews responded from all over Becker County. The fire was put out, but the home was destroyed and it didn't look like anyone made it out. The next day, everything had cooled enough to begin their search for the Rusness family.
Everything cooled down. They started a search for bodies.
But the only body that was found belonged to 8-year-old Brian.
There was a lot of sifting through the ashes. That's how they found the boy. And then no other body was confirmed to have been found. And it's been an ongoing investigation ever since.
The investigative report details the search for the missing parents.
On April 6, 1976, the sheriff's office, neighbors, and this deputy formed a search party and made a search of a mile-wide area involving woods, swamps, and a river in case one of the Rusnesses had fled the burning building and died away from the buildings or other foul play might have been brought about. This search turned up nothing. We decided to make a final search of the ashes in the basement. With 2 shaker screens and with 2 other deputy sheriffs, we started in the east end of the basement and turning each shovel into the 1/4-inch mesh screen, we worked our way across the basement, sometime working together and sometime alone, until every bit of the area had been covered. We found personal items of the family, dimes, nickels, quarters, pennies, and some silver dollars. Also, a few more small pieces of bone. At this point, it was believed there was only the boy's body. Identification was made possible by dental work on his teeth.
The Minneapolis Tribune published details of the couple in hopes that someone might find them.
Authorities have called a missing person alert for the area, including a description of the couple. Rusness Jr., 50, is described as 5'11", 165 pounds. He wears glasses, has dark hair with a receding hairline, and has a noticeably injured left eye. Peggy McKay, 41, 5'4", 118 pounds, has dark hair and wears glasses, according to the report. Authorities say they are pursuing all the possibilities. When only Brian's remains were found, 34 people combed the woods and swamps, but no trace of Rusness or Miss McKay has been found. George Parmentar, Peggy McKay's brother, said he was gathering eggs at the farm of a neighbor near Wolf Lake the night of the fire. He said a Wolf Lake resident telephoned him with the news around midnight. "I was shocked, of course," he said. "If it was murder, I'd like to get my hands on the guy that did it." He said he went to the burning house, which was surrounded by firemen and policemen.
In the burnt home, they found pennies and nickels and a flower vase. 2 of their dogs were also lost in the fire, but where did Bernard and Peggy go? Sheriff Todd Glander took office in January 2015.
And when I sat down at the sheriff's desk, I looked down alongside of my chair and I found 2 files.
One was the Rusness case, and he remembered that story from when he was a kid growing up in Becker County.
I made it a goal of mine to find some answers.
He's been working with Lieutenant Luke Sweary to reread the documents, re-interview neighbors and family, re-look over the photos, and re-ask the most basic questions. However,
a lot of still unanswered questions after this many years.
Did Peggy and Bernard set their own house on fire and flee? Family and friends told the Tribune back in the 80s they can't believe that. Plus, their 2 vehicles were left behind and bank account went untouched. Could they have been kidnapped? If so, by who? Why? Where would they have been taken? For Sheriff Glander, he says that it's possible Bernard and Peggy are alive somewhere out there.
If we haven't located them, that's something that is a possibility.
When he was a kid, people threw out a lot of different theories about what might have happened.
Well, I know, and again, I remember hearing this when I was 10 years old. I remember hearing that somebody found what they believed to be where an airplane landed, or an airplane was on that property. Now, from what I know, nothing has been proven that actually happened. There's been reports over the past of people making reports of, I think I saw Peggy, here. And you can see in some of the reports that they've followed up on what they could in those, but nothing was ever obviously confirmed.
In that 1983 Minneapolis Tribune article, the idea of a religious cult was thrown out, but a friend told the paper, no way. So if Peggy and Bernard didn't run away, and they weren't taken away, the other theory is that they might have died in that house fire with their son.
There's a statutory requirement for every fire to be investigated.
Dan Cryer is the Minnesota Fire Marshal, and Tate Mills is his deputy chief. They say it's never been confirmed what caused the fire on April 3rd, 1976.
When all you have is a basement and a foundation, it's really difficult to say where did the fire start unless it happened to start in the basement. If it started on a floor above, that damage is now going to be all in the basement or collapse somewhere else. And so trying to piece back together what the structure looked like is something that we have to do at any of these investigations. But it's incredibly challenging even today with all of the tools and the technology available to us.
They both say it's unlikely that 2 adults would be completely consumed by a fire while their 8-year-old son was not. But it's not technically an impossible scenario.
Let's put it to numbers that we see for our office. Our investigators do about 800 to 1,000 investigations a year. Of those, there are about 50 that involve fatalities. And we're generally able to recover remains in all of them.
They both say they've never personally seen it happen before.
The last just under 30 years that I've been in the fire service, I've never been on a scene where there hasn't been somebody recovered that we know that's in there. It's very unlikely in today's fire world or fire investigation world. It's not to say it couldn't happen, but again, the circumstances would have to be pretty incredible for that to happen, where there's no trace or there's no fragment of bone or something found where we could analyze it at a lab.
The way fires are investigated has evolved a lot in the past 5 decades. Right now, if you go on the BCA website, this case is listed as an arson. But Cryer and Mills say that's not what they would call it. They call it undetermined. But back then, if an inspector couldn't determine any other cause for a fire, they usually decided that it must have been an arson.
Back then, undetermined was a failed investigation, whereas now we look at it as we can't prove a hypothesis to prove that this is what started the fire.
State Fire Marshal at the time, Rusty Tallman, was quoted in saying that there is no way Bernard and Peggy were in that home when it burned. But Mills says that it's possible something got missed.
I would hate to say that my predecessors missed something, but there's always a chance, right?
Sheriff Glander is retiring at the end of this year. In these last few months, he wants to close the book on this case.
Were they kidnapped? Did they leave on their own? Did something happen before the fire? I think that's all speculation because we just don't know.
He wants answers not just for himself, who grew up hearing stories about the mystery in Wolf Lake, but for the family who still lives in the area today.
I visited with family members over the years, and they just want answers. And I know it's been difficult for them, and the same with us. We would like answers. We want to see closure of some sort. Chloe's family,
You know, this is an incredibly tragic situation. You know, people's lives were lost in a fire, and and we want to solve that answer. That's our motivation. That's how we were established as a state agency, to investigate origin and cause of fires. That information then feeds or is directed to code and prevention measures to prevent fires and to prevent fire loss and to prevent injury and fatalities from fire.
Sheriff Glander doesn't want to call this a cold case, but they have no new information to push them forward.
This case was reopened with the BCA 2004, something that it's not been stagnant, but again, there's not a lot of information to go on. Anybody that has information, please come and talk to us.